Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 1, Episode 12. I'm Bethany, your host, and joining me are YouTubers Audrey from Perpetual Pages and Jocelyn from Yogi with a Book. And today we're going to be talking about underrated science fiction and fantasy, which should be fun. If you want to support the podcast and get early access to episodes and exciting bonus content from our guests, check out our Patreon linked in the show notes. And big thank you to all of our patrons, with a special shout out to our world-expanding patron, Trina. Your support makes this possible. Before our conversation today, it's time for On My Radar, where I'll share recent or upcoming book releases in science fiction, fantasy, and romance that I'm excited about, and then our guests will have the opportunity to share one as well. The books for today's episode will be released between March 3rd and March 16th, 2021, with the exception of the guest recommendations, which may include any upcoming release. And as always, you can find these books and all the books that we talk about in the episode in the show notes. First up on March 9th, we've got two releases I want to highlight. We are getting Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the final book in the Brown Sisters trilogy. I have been loving all of them. And this one is an opposites attract romance between chaotic Eve and an uptight bed and breakfast owner. Then We Shall Sing a Song into the Deep by Andrew Kelly Stewart is a Tor.com novella that looks intriguing. It follows an order of monks living inside a nuclear submarine who believe they're meant to trigger the second coming. I mean, that's like a wild synopsis, right? Then on March 16th, there are three titles I'm excited about. First, A Queen of Gilded Horns by Amanda Joy is the conclusion to an African-inspired YA fantasy duology about royal sisters who must fight to the death for the throne. Also, there's magic and vampires, and I really enjoyed the first one, and I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel. Then, That Way Madness Lies, edited by Dahlia Adler, is a collection of 15 modern takes on Shakespeare's classics from 15 different YA authors. Previously, I read the collection of Edgar Allan Poe retellings that they did in His Hideous Heart. They were great, so I've definitely got high hopes for this. And then lastly, Fragile Remedy by Maria and Grande Mora is a YA sci-fi book about a teen boy created to be genetically engineered medication tissue as a cure for the elite from a fatal lung rot that has been ravaging the population. But he had been smuggled out as a child, became an engineer, and then he starts to fall for a boy, but he hasn't been designed to have a long life, and now he must decide what he's willing to do to live. This one sounds like there's a lot going on, but it sounds really interesting. With that said, please join me in welcoming Audrey and Jocelyn to the show. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Can you guys both briefly introduce yourselves to our listeners and share your pick for an upcoming release you're excited about?
So my name is Audrey. My channel on YouTube is Perpetual Pages. I'm a queer, trans, non-binary, Mexican-American book reviewer, writer, and freelancer. And like I said, I do my YouTube channel where I talk about what I read on the internet, and I read pretty much everything. So the new release that I wanted to bring, I feel like it's kind of expected, but I have to do it. So I wanted to talk about Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas, which comes out on March 23rd of 2021. And I'm really excited for it. I've already read it, but I'm still excited about it. It is a contemporary, dark, twisty reimagining of the Peter Pan canon that imagines Wendy and her brothers going missing a few years before the story begins. And Wendy is the only one of them to come back. And then children start going missing again, and everyone's sort of looking to Wendy to figure out what's happening. And she runs into a guy named Peter, who is eerily like the stories she's told her whole life. And he claims that he knows where the children went, and they're going to figure out what happened and go into the dark woods and save the town from its awful fate. And it's really good, and it's really emotional, and it destroyed me, and I'd do it again.
Yes, I am planning on reading that one really soon. I'm so excited.
So good. I'm so upset about how good it is.
I'm glad that we're starting off on a really strong, like, Audrey brand pick.
100%. That's appropriate.
I had to.
I love that for you. I'm Jocelyn. My YouTube channel is called Yogi with a Book. I also clearly talk about book things, read a lot of SFF, and I also really enjoy reading all sorts of Latinx books. I myself am Cuban American, and reading Latinx literature is something that I'm just really passionate about and constantly seeking out. a thing, or the book that I chose
Thing.
that is there's this thing, it's shaped like a book, that is coming out on March 30th. And I kind of wanted to stay in theme of the episode as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of an underhyped book. I see literally 1 rating and 1 review on Goodreads.
Ooh.
It's called Jeliya, which is spelt Djeliya, and it is a graphic novel. On the cover, it even says a West African fantasy epic, and it is written and drawn by a Senegalese-French author-illustrator named Juni Ba, and it is about adventures of a prince and his loyal royal storyteller on their journey to meet the great wizard who destroyed their world and then withdrew into his tower, never to be seen again. So it sounds really great. I really love this illustrator's illustrations. The artwork I've seen from this looks beautiful. It comes out March 30th from TKO Studios, and it seems like it's going to be a bunch of fun also, because who doesn't love traditional tales and folklore? That's absolutely my jam.
Yes.
That sounds awesome.
I'm learning something already.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I'll be looking this up when I'm editing this episode. Awesome. Okay, so to start off, I thought because I have the 2 of you here, we could talk about something that doesn't come up frequently on this podcast, just because I don't read as much of it, but both of you read quite a bit of middle grade, which I think is great. I read a little bit, but not nearly as much as either of you do, and I thought it would be fun to talk about science fiction and fantasy middle grade titles that you feel like don't get a lot of attention, because I feel like there's a lot of these big bestsellers that everyone knows about, but there's a lot of smaller things coming out that are great, and I see both of you reviewing them. So I would love to hear, what are some of your best picks for things people really should be reading in middle grade?
I'm going to let Jocelyn start.
Great.
Reverse alphabetical order.
Amazing. I think the first thing that pops into mind right now is a new release that is getting some traction, but I don't think nearly enough. And that is Amari and the Night Brothers by Dee Austin. Oh my goodness. It was a fantastic debut. And it's all about this young girl named Amari who is following this thread to her brother who went missing, and then finds this sort of underground bureau of special bureau of paranormal investigators or something. I forget the actual wording of it, but she finds this bureau and sort of gets wrapped up into this fake summer camp and is looking for her brother. It's just fantastic.
Yes, that one's on my TBR.
Yeah, no, I just ordered myself a copy because I keep hearing so many good things about it.
I'm so excited.
Awesome.
Yeah. Kind of in the same vein, I feel like another new release that's flown a little bit under the radar. I'm not sure if it just released or it's releasing very soon, but it's The Year I Flew Away by Marie Arnold, which is an Own Voices Haitian American sort of historical fantasy about this young girl named Gabrielle who moves to Haiti from sorry. It's about a young girl named Gabrielle who moves from Haiti to Brooklyn ahead of her parents, and it's hard for her to fit in there, and she runs into this witch who offers her a chance to speak English perfectly and pass as an American, and so she takes the deal, and then she quickly realizes that she gave up a lot of herself in that exchange, and then she has to battle the witch to undo the spell, which I think sounds really cool. So that one's on my TBR, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah.
Yes, I should be getting that from the library in a week. It sounds amazing.
I'm really excited. Yes.
That's awesome. I hadn't heard of that one. That's cool. Yeah, I was trying to think through, because like I said, I don't read nearly as much middle grade, so I don't have anything super new. Although I am excited for Amari and the Night Brothers. One that I read last year and really enjoyed was The Forgotten Girl by India Hill Brown.
Yes.
It was so good, and I felt like it was really flying under the radar. It's great as a middle grade ghost story, but it also is dealing with these issues of forgotten Black history and communities and the poor treatment of Black cemeteries and the racism with burial stuff. It's really interesting, and I just think very it's like spooky but not too scary for a middle grade reader, and I just thought that was so good.
Yeah, I really like that one. And it was like you said, it sort of deals with like the legacy of segregation and how that's still affecting current generations today. And yeah, I think it was really intense and creepy. I definitely recommend that for people looking for like a paranormal sort of middle grade fantasy. It was really, really good.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else that doesn't necessarily have to be, let's say, an underappreciated backlist title?
I have a couple, but I'm like, do you have thoughts, Joss? You have no idea. I'm like, there's like 20 things circling around my brain right now.
There's so many.
This is why you guys were perfect for this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first one that jumps to mind is the Love Sugar Magic series by Ana Mediano, which I think you and I both are like constantly talking about. And pretty much all Latinx folks who are reading middle grade are just like, read this series, people.
Please.
It's so good. It's like this very sweet family, but we follow mostly Leo, who is the youngest in her family, and she uncovers the fact that her family are actually brujas. And so then they don't really want to let her in on the secret, and so she is kind of going behind everyone's back and like trying to learn magic, and there's hijinks and there's ghosts and baking, and it's just wonderful.
Oh, it's so good. Fun. So good. I was thinking of The Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste, which is an Own Voices middle grade fantasy sort of based in Caribbean folklore. And it's about this girl named Kareen who sort of believes that Jumbies are just like trickster demons that parents made up just to keep their kids behaving and keep them in line. But then she sort of chases after this strange creature to the edge of the forest. And shortly after that, a stranger comes to town, and that same stranger ends up like cooking dinner for her dad and like trying to like weasel their way into her family. And it's part of this like bigger plot to take over the whole island. So I haven't read that one myself, but I've heard really, really good things about it.
Yeah, I've been hearing some things about that too recently. That's a good one.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Jerry read the whole series recently.
Yeah.
I feel like that feels correct to me.
Yeah, I think so. And I know Ashley from Bookish Realm read a couple of them and really liked them as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then there's also, I also want to give a shout out to The Real Boy by Anne Ursu, which I feel like is not talked about a lot. And it actually has an autistic hero of color, but it is important to note that it's not Own Voices for the autistic representation, but the main character is like canonically autistic. And it's about this boy named Oscar, who's like a shop boy for a powerful magician. And then the children in the nearby city start falling mysteriously ill. And there's whispers of like a dark something lurking in the forest. And so he has to like venture out of his small corner of the world and save the home he loves. And it's like full of magic. It's high fantasy. It's really fun. And it's gotten some really good reviews from disabled reviewers as well. I actually found a review of it on, I think it's Disability and Kidlit, which is this organization where professional reviewers with disabilities review books that have disability at the forefront. And they really liked it as well. And they did an interview with the author. So that's also one that I think doesn't get enough love. And I read it a very long time ago and I really like it. I still have it. So like that's the testament, if you keep the book on the shelf,
you keep it for that long, yeah,
it's a real one.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, so moving on from middle grade, thinking about this could be adult, this could be YA titles in science fiction and fantasy. Anything that you feel like, and there's a couple of things I want to talk about with this. One is recommendations of titles you think aren't talked about enough or think are underappreciated for other reasons, but kind of tied into this. I think it would be interesting to talk about some of the issues that sometimes come up with like reasons that a book might be underappreciated. And the specific example that came to mind for me was some of what happened when Nocturna by Maya Montaigne came out.
Oh my God. I'm so glad you brought, I was like, ooh, me and Jocelyn are ready to go to town on this right now.
I'm going to let you guys talk about this.
Well, I think it was also me talking about it that got Bethany to read it, right? I think I specifically was like, Bethany, you need to read this. The reviews are incorrect.
But no, you're right. And I liked it a lot. I thought it was great. But yeah, I had a lot of feelings about it, but I would like to hear from you guys.
Oh my God. I'm like, where do we begin?
Okay,
Can I just
I'll
say that, like,
start.
I was looking it up recently on Goodreads and I saw that it was like a very low, like 3-star average rating. And I was just like, oh, this is so wrong. Like, that's so wrong.
Yeah.
I'll let Jocelyn start. I feel like you have a lot of burning feelings. We both do. We both do.
My journey with this book started with getting the audiobook and wondering if I wanted to start it right then or not. I naively log on to Goodreads, go down to the reviews, and the first thing I see is a 1-star of someone calling it a ripoff of what V. Schwab's Shades of Magic book.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm petty enough to double check what this is, like to fact check this. It is not a ripoff.
It's not.
No, it's
not at all. I would argue that there is no way it could be a ripoff because Nocturna deals with colonialism and imperialism and what happens after the colonizers leave and what that means for a nation's identity and the way that people have to deal with the aftermath of that. And I think that is very integral to the story of Nocturna and not something that is at all discussed or brought up or even like thought of in the Shades of Magic London. So that's
any V.E. Schwab book, really. Let's just lay it on the table.
Well, and I don't know. I mean, one of the arguments I saw that I just thought was patently ridiculous is saying that one of the reasons they think it's a ripoff is because in Shades of Magic, they use language-based magic. And in Nocturna, they use language-based magic. But I'm like, V.E. Schwab did not invent the idea of using words for magic.
No.
Yeah. Also, they like to say that because both of the female leads are thieves,
yes,
somehow, like you can only have one thief woman character.
It's also so novel.
Yes.
Yeah. Brand new thing. Happened just once.
Exactly. I feel like Jocelyn pretty much covered it, but yeah, that's the common criticism is that it's a like 1-to-1 ripoff of the Shades of Magic series, which makes absolutely no sense because of all the things Jocelyn just said, but also because it's like a plot-wise, it is a completely different story that has like nothing to do with, you know, multiple worlds layered on top of each other and whatever else the Shades of Magic series is about. So I have to laugh sometimes. You have to laugh.
Yeah, people see the superficial like archetypes that the characters have settled into, and they think that just because something uses the same trope, that means it's the same book.
Exactly.
Which is extremely frustrating because that's not at all how tropes work.
At all.
No, it's not. And which, you know, I read a lot in the romance genre where like you purposefully pitch books as having the same tropes because that's what people look for. So it's so interesting to me that in other genres people call it plagiarism.
Yes, exactly. No, that's a good point. Yeah.
I think what's interesting about this, because everybody should probably read Nocturna because it is a great book. And if one of you wants to talk about what it is, feel free to do that. And then I think that is an example of a larger thing I see. And if you have other examples you want to talk about or things you would like to see people read, but you do seem to see things like this happening where particularly if authors of color are writing science fiction or fantasy that have tropes or similarities to popular books by white authors, they will sometimes be called plagiarizing. And I've seen that more than once.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Did you want to summarize the book, Jocelyn,
or
do you want me to?
You are better at summaries than I am.
Well, for anyone who doesn't know, Nocturna is a sort of own voices fantasy with this Latinx-inspired world, and it's about this face-shifting thief named Finn and a prince named Alfie, whose brother was tragically killed, and now he's obsessed with finding a way to bring him back to life. And then their two paths cross inadvertently, and I think they unleash like an ancient power that could destroy the world, and they have to fix it. So that's basically the gist. But like it's really, really good. And you should not pay any attention to the 3-star rating or, you know, the white people who cry plagiarism on behalf of V. Schwab, because that is not at all true. And it's a really, really wonderful story. And I think I don't know if we touched on this, but the sequel, Occulta, was pushed back because the author had to do more revisions on it because some people were saying again that it was too close to V.E. Schwab's work. So that, like, we could have had the sequel so much sooner. And I'm bitter that we haven't because of that exact reason.
I did not know that. Yikes. Yeah, that's frustrating. Also, it has one of the creepiest YA villains I've read.
Yes.
It does. It does.
It's a very, like, tangled situation to not get into spoilers.
Yes. But the ending is intense. Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's good. Anything similar or linked, like things that you can think of that you feel like have gotten a bad rap for misled reasons?
I mean, the other obvious thing that comes to mind is any book that has been compared to Six of Crows in the last 4 years.
I was going to say that. Like, I know Gilded Wolves has gotten a bad rap for that exact reason.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, which it's really not that similar to Six of Crows.
Again, Leigh Bardugo did not invent heists. I'm sorry to tell people. She didn't. They were around before she came. And in this case as well, we're talking about a lot of characters in the Gilded Wolves who are dealing with, like, colonialism and are characters of color who have been or who are from countries that were occupied by foreign countries that stole their property. And it's about bringing it back. I don't understand.
I don't understand either.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, Roshni Chokshi has talked about that she was more inspired by the movie National Treasure, which I totally see. I heard her say at an event she wanted to write National Treasure, but with more attractive people. Like, okay.
That feels right. That feels right.
Yeah. It's a lot of, like, lush descriptions. It's in Paris. There's dresses, and I love the magic. I think it's cool.
Yeah. I haven't read that one yet, but I'm very excited to read it out of spite.
Yes.
What better reason to pick a book?
I mean, I know I'm gonna like it because I love Roshni Chokshi, but it's just like, that's the extra layer. I'm gonna read it out of spite.
That seems fair.
Did you have any other titles, Jocelyn? Because I have some, but I don't want to, like, steamroll over you.
No, go for it.
So the one that always comes to mind for me is, like, Yoonha Lee. Just all of their titles, I feel like maybe not underhyped, but, like, they get an unnecessarily bad rap, I feel. And I feel like they get a lot of low ratings because people are like, it's too weird, you know, I don't understand it. And it's just, it's so hard to explain because it's like, it's not overtly a microaggression, but it feels like a microaggression, right? Because Yoonha Lee writes a lot of, like, own voices, Korean-based sci-fi and fantasy. It's very queer, it's very trans, it's very out there. And it's like, I just want to start by saying, like, Yoonha Lee has a beautiful mind. And, like, that's not up for debate. Like, that's just fact. And the other thing that's not up for debate is they write complex worlds. No. The other thing that's not up for debate is that they write complex but not unknowable worlds. Like, what they do is very human and it's very personable. And it's one of the best things about their writing. Like, this is the hill that I'm going to die on, guys. Like, I invite people to, like, try and carry my still smoking corpse from this hill where it is permanently soldered. Like, my body is going to decompose and refertilize this hill so that it can continue its endless journey of growth and beauty. Because, like, Yoonha Lee is incredible. It's like, I feel like people just need to read Nine Fox Gambit and realize that, like, this is someone who is literally capable of doing anything. Like, Yoonha Lee could really be out there, like, being a scientist, being a mathematician, being, like, an artist. Like, they could be doing anything else. but they're using their life minutes on Earth to tell us stories that come from their incredible brain. And like, that is a blessing. Like, I'm so bad about it. Like, Yoonha Lee is incredible. Like, that's the hill I'm going to die on. That's this whole episode. Like, Yoonha Lee is incredible and gets a horrible rap just for being a genius. And like, that's my take.
Okay, I now need to go buy one of their books because I have not read them yet.
I mean, the Hex and Fate series is so good. I need to read
Yes, it's so good. I feel like people get scared off because they're like, oh, it's so complex and like I don't know how to begin to understand. It's like, just trust the process, bro. Just go with it. It will come to you. I've also been waiting for more people to read Phoenix Extravagant, which is their book that came out last year, because it has an ending that I know for facts is going to piss off so many people because it's just like so out there and it's like so just next level, but like nobody's read it yet. And so I can't gloat. I can't like lord it over people because like I'm very like, again, out of spite. I love that ending so much. I'm just like, you go, Yoonha Lee, you do whatever you want. And like, I will love it and I'll buy it. And yeah, so I'm disappointed that more people haven't gotten there yet because I'm just very spiteful about it.
I'm so sorry. I pre-ordered it. I still haven't read it yet, but I'm so excited for
you. I can't wait for you to get to the end, Jocelyn, because it's like it's so like left field. It's incredible.
I love that.
Even more I 100% need to like get one of their books. Okay, but what you're saying,
to get back to middle grade though. They also have a middle grade with the Rick Riordan Presents imprint called Dragon Pearl Standalone Sci-Fi.
Yes.
Oh.
Look at me.
Nice.
Yes. Also good.
Yeah. So what you're saying, I hear some people saying the same thing about the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin.
Oh my God. Thank you for bringing this. I was going to bring it up. I was like, this is too much. But go on.
Which... Look, it is a masterpiece. She is a genius, and it's amazing. I mean, there are so many things that could be said about it, but one thing I keep saying that I think is interesting is N.K. Jemisin in the 5th season is one of the only authors that has ever convinced me that I really was rooting for a polyamorous relationship.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Okay, because like that's really hard to do. I feel like a lot of authors, I'm like, I don't buy the feelings. And this, I was like, yes, they should all be together. I believe in this. And like, it's just like one small example of what she's capable of. And I see people saying, oh, it's too dense, it's too intimidating, it's too complicated for me, I don't understand it. I'm like, it's not that really complicated. Just go with it. Just go with it. There are layers. You can reread it again and get more from it.
It's weird to me because people can watch Avatar: The Last Airbender as they should. It is one of the best shows in the world, and it's sort of basically the same thing like as earthbending. You know what I'm saying? Like orogeny is basically the same thing as earthbending. Like people use their minds and their emotions to manipulate rock. And it's much deeper than that. But like the basic premise of the whole magic system is basically that. So it's like, if you can watch that and understand that like people can manipulate the elements with their mind, why can't you read the 5th season? Like it does not compute.
I mean, just because the first book is partly written in second person, like it's not.
I love that it's in second person. I actually want more books written in second person because it's so interesting. But both of those series, I can attest to the fact that I am not smart enough to understand all of the layers those authors are like putting out there for me.
Oh, for sure.
But they made me care so much about the characters that I was like, plot who? Like, I don't need to actually know what's happening in this world. I don't need to figure it out. I just love these characters, and they leave enough for me to be fully invested while also like completely floundering in the amazing world building they've done.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, not to go back to like the Yoonha Lee train, but like something I always think about in the Hexarchate series is that like there's all this wild stuff going on with like algorithms and space and war or whatever and all that stuff and calendrical rot. And then like I think it's in the second book, there's like this character who just like has a green onion plant, who like they love it and like they just want to water it and like watch it thrive. And it's like, I always point to that. Like, that's what Yoonha Lee does. Like, who cares about what's happening in space? Like, these are just like people who have very basic interests and wants and desires. And it's like, that's the heart of this story. Sorry, I went back to the hill.
No, it's okay. I love it. I love it. That's awesome.
There's so many more, but like, I'm like, there's so many examples.
It's so good. I mean, that's what the whole episode's about.
Oh my God. Did you have any other titles you thought of, Jocelyn?
I mean, in general, or there's so many titles.
I know.
There are so many. I know.
Sure.
I was thinking maybe like, I haven't read it, but I feel like Freshwater by Akwege Emezi probably gets a similar rap.
Oh,
because it's so like expansive and it's so like different from the sort of linear thinking and linear storytelling that we're used to. Again, I haven't read it, but I know it's very like queer. It's very sort of explores indigenous African beliefs and divinity and like multi-identity. So, and I'll admit, like, that's sort of like intimidated me from reading it, you know, but I don't think it's going to be bad. I think it's going to be incredible because I know Akwege is like a genius, but I feel like it's probably a book that's like underrated because exactly of that reason.
Well, I think it's underrated, and I also think it's completely misunderstood by a large portion of people.
Sure.
So, like, I actually read Freshwater as an arc, and I like loved it to pieces. So I got to go to the launch of it. I got to go to Akwege Emezi's launch, like the next week. And I was like, "Holy shit, this is amazing!" But they spoke so much about one of the things that they wanted to do with this book was they wanted to recenter their beliefs, and that so many Western cultures had come in and said, no, this is reality. No, this is reality. And I do see of that happening a lot in reviews, especially from white reviewers, but just in general from like global North reviewers. There's a lot of people who want to boil Freshwater down to like, this is about mental illness and a girl who's unwell because she has like other selves within her. And it's like, it's fully like making a bad faith argument. Yeah. Like it's like very much not that. Like the author specifically was like, no, it's not about mental illness. Like it's just this person's life. Like it, so that one I even hesitate to call like SFF because it's not that person's reality. And like,
exactly. I think that's a really interesting one because it's like semi-autobiographical. It's like very close to Akwege's own experience. But it's sort of like marketed as having like this sort of genre tilt.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that can be sometimes the issue is when publicists don't really know how to pitch a book properly, and then it gets torn apart for something that it never really was. So like one book that I read, and it's pretty controversial, I feel like, because there were a lot of people who didn't like it, and I think part of the problem is the way it was sold was Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James.
Oh, I thought you were going with The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh.
Well, I mean, no, that I mean, I actually
later
we could talk about that. We could talk about that one too because I actually think that's also accurate.
Yes.
No, but Black Leopard, Red Wolf was pitched to me. I read an arc of it actually too, but it's as African Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah.
And it's not.
Like it's
it's really not. It's very literary fantasy.
Yes.
Very literary fantasy, and it is difficult to read because it is a lot. Like it's very intense, it's very dark, it does not pull its punches, and like all the content warnings on it. But I think it's brilliant at doing what it sets out to do. And I similarly got to go to the book launch which was really interesting, hearing Marlon James talk about why they wrote the book the way that they did, and the ideas behind using traditional African storytelling devices, and also hearing more about, growing up in a religious household as a queer Black person, and some of the internalized homophobia that took a long time to deal with. And like some of that comes out in Black Leopard, Red Wolf. And so people will review it and be like, this is disgusting, this is homophobic. And I'm like, no, that's not what it's doing. So I don't know. I find things like that frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, mismarketing.
Well, I think
I feel like that was the death kiss, like African Game of Thrones. Like, so many things wrong with that.
Yeah,
I think it's bad marketing, but there's also like just publishing in general hasn't figured out how to effectively use comp titles, because people just throw them out. They throw them out without giving reasons for why that's the comp title. And like speaking of Game of Thrones, like one of the things I've loved watching is Ashley from Don't Have a Degree in Reading, like going through and she picked separate books for the series, comparing them to Game of Thrones, and like set out with different criteria. Like when I think of Game of Thrones, I think of how gritty it is, I think of sex, I think of multiple POVs, and then so she breaks down all of these books that are compared to Game of Thrones, and she's just like, no, because they're not Game of Thrones.
Not
you know this. Yeah, people need to be, I think, more in tune with why they are picking a comp title. Is it because of the way it's written? Is it because of the setting? Is it because of the specific plot element? Like, you can't just say that it's like this thing. That's not how anything works.
Yeah.
You can't just say whatever you want.
No.
Very true.
And
very true.
Yeah, I mean, by a similar token, you're right, though. We could definitely talk about The Beautiful.
Oh my God.
It made me so sad because I actually loved it a lot, and
I did
so
too.
many people didn't.
I don't understand how people didn't see there were vampires. I was like, you see those weird people in the shadows? Vampires. Like, why didn't you just...
I think the problem is, like, it was really sold as having vampires, and like you don't know for sure they're on the page until near the end of the book.
Yeah.
And I think people were expecting like Anne Rice or something. I don't know. And that's not what it was. Plus the fact that it's really more of a mystery, like a historical mystery with paranormal elements. So like they really probably should have compared it more to like, I don't know, Kate Daniels for teenagers or something. I don't know. I mean, maybe not that specifically, but it's more that vibe in terms of like there's a mystery element. I loved it. I thought it was great, but I think it wasn't what people were expecting.
Yeah, and then it sort of like turned into this weird thing where like people didn't want to say it had vampires in it. Like they thought it was a spoiler to say that there are vampires in it because they only really come in towards the end. And I'm just like, but what do you mean? Like it's there are vampires. Like, and I didn't think it was that subtle. I thought I was like, I'm like, there's some pretty heavy hints in here that like there's inhuman stuff happening. So it's like not a stretch to be like, this is a vampire novel.
Oh yeah.
I think it's just that like the main character that you're following like doesn't know that vampires exist yet. So like until she knows, she can't name them.
Exactly.
The whole time.
Yeah.
Doing vampire stuff.
I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess it reminds me of when I see people sometimes upset in fantasy books where like sexualities are not named with modern titles on the page, and they're like, is it really there though? It doesn't count because they didn't say the word. And I'm like, really though? Like, is that what you need?
Yeah, no, that's tough. I mean, it's hard because like I've obviously, you want to see things explicitly, like you want to see people use the labels you use or that you recognize, but it's also like just because it doesn't have a special word doesn't mean it's not queer. We can agree that it's queer. Like, do we have to then engage in erasure because it doesn't have like, well, they didn't say they were omnisexual. Like they didn't say they were demi, gray ace. Like it's like, can we relax? And also can authors like just start making up words? Like you wrote a whole fantasy book or a whole sci-fi book made up of
make up words
from your brain. Like, can you just make a word for
That's a good
trans?
point.
Like, I beg
Yeah.
you.
No, I mean, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think I don't. Okay, I guess that's like kind of a whole different conversation, but um, but it just makes me think about have either of you guys read Winter's Orbit yet?
Not yet.
Yes. Yeah, I just read it
Oh,
last month. Yes.
yay! I love it so much,
It's
but
so
I think,
good.
oh man, yeah. I'm assuming Jocelyn hasn't, but
Not yet.
one thing. Okay, so one of the things that I think is so interesting about it, though, is the way that it deals with uh, gender and sexuality in a really different way culturally. Like, I thought
Mm,
that was really cool that she made up, hey, here's how we tell people's genders is by the types of accessories they wear, like, or
yes.
the way they tie a scarf. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I was like, it's makes me think like, why don't people engage with like more mechanics like that? Like, this is the
Yeah.
system in our world, and like this is how you know, or this is how you don't know. And it's like
Hmm.
I'm kind of back and forth on it. Like, I thought it was cool. So it's like, yay, and introducing and sort of engaging with like non-binary genders, but it's also it was also kind of weird because it's like, well, then you're only saying that there's like three ways to engage gender in this world. So
Hmm.
you're making non-binary genders like the third gender box, which is a weird
Hmm.
energy. But it was still nice to like have, like trans or non-binary, characters in the story. And it's like they didn't have to like come out or announce themselves because it's like, I'm wearing this bracelet and therefore you know that I use they them pronouns. It's like, okay, cool,
Right.
great. We know. We're on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I've really enjoyed the way I've seen two authors now do this. Neon Yang and
Mm,
also Aliette de Bodard, both in The Vanisher's Palace by Aliette de Bodard, and then in the first couple of Tensor books by Neon Yang. I haven't gotten to the rest.
mm,
But both of them make a note, like in the text, like we learn people's pronouns because of in their language, like the way they say I is gendered.
right.
So when
Oh,
someone is
that's
like
interesting.
announcing their self, like
Mm-hmm.
in the grammar, it is built in like what their
That's
pronouns are.
cool.
And
Yes.
I also really love that because I love when people like use language in a really interesting way in their SFF.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And they're both
Yeah.
also Asian authors,
Yeah.
Vietnamese
I was
and
gonna say that,
Singaporean.
yeah, it's I like that they include that in their stories because it's sort of derivative of how like languages in Asian countries actually work. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, I like seeing that in
That's
their
cool.
fiction as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So one thing that I did want to talk a little bit about is um either reason, I mean, we've talked about touched somewhat on this, but if there are other reasons that you think sometimes authors are underappreciated, or if you feel like there are certain subgenres or types of science fiction or fantasy books that you don't feel like get enough attention.
Mm.
And I'll give an example of a book that I really loved
Hmm.
and I feel like was underappreciated. And I think it's because we don't do a very good job of always okay, well, I'll just talk about the book. It's gonna be easier. So it's Beyond the Black Door by A.M. Strickland,
Mm,
which I really loved, and it got kind of mixed reviews. It was one of my favorite books the year it came out, but it's a it's a YA dark fantasy romance
mm,
with a biromantic asexual main character.
mhm.
And I loved it. I thought it was so good and had so many feelings. And I think what's interesting about it is I think people didn't know how to categorize it because they were confused by the
Mm,
fact that a character could have like angst and romantic feelings without wanting to have sex.
right.
Ugh.
And
Yep.
so
Yep.
so
Yeah.
so
I
I
mean,
think that's interesting. Yeah. I think that was like part of why it seemed to me from a lot of the reviews I read that people were like, what is this? I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't read that yet, but I can totally see that happening. And I think that we were also getting that with Alatsue. I've heard a lot of people talk
Yes.
about
Interesting.
since she is she's
Mm.
aromantic,
Mm-hmm.
and there's
And
like no
Ace.
romantic interest. People are like, is this middle grade? Oh, and Ace, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah. Before I read Alatsue, actually with Joss, yeah,
Yeah.
I for some reason thought it was categorized as middle grade as well. I had heard that somewhere along the line, and like it's not.
Mm.
It's like you can have like YA, like fantasy adventure that doesn't have like the person getting together with someone else in the end, and like it's still fantasy. Like I don't know why like people had to sort of infantilize it or like sort of sanitize it as like not
Yeah.
being YA because the main character was Ace. Like it was just again weird energy. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I'm actually, I think because of this, I had heard Ashley from Bookashron talking about this nonfiction book, and I'm now waiting to get it on audio from my library. That
Oh,
sounds
Ace by Angela Chen.
yes,
Yes.
I read that.
Yeah,
awesome.
I bought it after. Well, it had been on my list for a very, very, very long time, but I also heard Ashley talking about it. I was like, "Yep, that's the final stone that's
Yeah,
gonna push me over the edge." So here I go.
yeah. I'm like, I'll probably within the next month or two get it from like have it on audio, but it sounds really interesting. And I know hearing her, one of the things was that we have these weird hangups, which is, I mean, I think is true of like with sexuality in our culture, and
Hmm.
yeah. So I think some of that comes through in these stories that like you can have a valid narrative without having to have sex, without having to have romance, or you can have one without the other, and that is okay even for teenagers. And also, you know, you can sometimes have romance in a middle grade book.
Right.
'Cause-
And it's like it doesn't have to be like weird or,
Crazy.
or like it doesn't have to be like I don't know. I feel like when there's sort of not even romance, but even just hints of romance in middle grade, like people get really weird about it. Like, oh, this might not be appropriate for young
like
readers, or like, would
so
young people
bizarre.
really have like these feelings at this age? And it's like,
I mean,
I feel
I
like
did.
most people had like crushes on other people. I don't want to normalize it because like not
No,
everybody obviously
not
experiences
everybody.
sexual attraction or romantic attraction, you know, but I feel like most people have experienced like crushing on someone else. So it's like, is it that out of the realm of possibility? I feel like this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with books that get a bad rap. But I feel like a middle grade that gets a bad rap for like this exact reason is Furthermore by Tahara Mafi, because
Yeah.
the two characters have not even, they don't even have like an explicit romance. They're just sort of like forming a romantic inclination towards each other over the course of the story. And people were like, oh, I think Tahara Mafi's lost. Like, she just wrote this YA fantasy romance series and now like she's trying to go middle grade and like she doesn't know how it works here. And like, that's not how we do it. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like for that's a crime, first of all. Furthermore is incredible and Witchwood is
It's
incredible. So I'm just
so
gonna say that. But like
beautiful.
it's
I
wild.
wonder
It's
I
wild out
wonder
here.
See, I
I
think it's
wonder
so
how many of those.
bizarre.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think it's so bizarre because, yeah, while certainly not everybody does, that feels to me more like adults being uncomfortable with their children having a romantic interest, not
Yes,
anything about whether the children actually are. Because I
exactly.
mean, I can remember, as far back as like when I was 10, I and my friends, like there was definitely romantic interest
Right.
amongst not everybody. Like there were people
Mhm.
who weren't, but like a lot of people did at like 10. So like, okay, really
Yeah.
though, like you know what's happening. There's like little kids having their boyfriends and girlfriends and having crushes, and not everybody is there, but it exists. And so to me, it seems valid to have that as a story for the kids who want it, and to do it in an age appropriate way, because otherwise they're just going to go read YA.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, exactly. It's just like you said, I feel like it's a common experience, not because everyone has that inclination again, but like why wouldn't they when like there's this conditioning, obviously, like in
Mhm.
society, like from like birth pretty much, where they're like, oh, he's gonna be such a lady killer or whatever. And it's like, then you're surprised that like, 10-year-olds feel like they have romantic interests. Like it's like, society is so
Yeah.
Have I said that I'm tired? Because I'm tired. What were you gonna say, Joss?
I was gonna say, I wonder how many of those people that were knocking Tahira Mafi are Persebeth shippers.
Oh my god.
Oh
my god. Do not make me talk about Uncle Rick on this show, Jocelyn.
That was it. We don't have to talk anymore.
That is not underappreciated, so
no, it's overappreciated. But that's a good point. I'm sure they're like, they have their ships like that.
I don't know. That's very interesting. Oh man. Any other types of SFF books or subgenres or specific titles you just want to talk about that you feel like don't get enough attention?
When I was thinking of like types of SFF that I feel are underrated or get a bad rap or don't get enough attention, I was thinking of like fantasy romance, like paranormal fantasy. And then I wrote soft SFF with a question mark because I don't know if that's a thing, because I know like hard SFF is a thing. And I don't know if like that's a thing that men created so that they can feel better about themselves. Like, I'm reading hard SFF or whatever. But like, like soft SFF where it's like not necessarily plot driven or it doesn't have a lot of like science, but it's like, it's just a soft little adventure. I feel like that's kind of underrated. Also like graphic novels and comics. And then I wrote in all caps manga. Like I don't know why like manga and comics and all that is not considered like a part of the larger conversation when it comes to like SFF, especially like I said, manga in all caps, because it's like that is SFF central. There's like so much fantasy, so much sci-fi happening there. It's like, but that's never included in the general talk about SFF, and that's probably like a Western issue. But that's kind of what came to mind for me.
I love this point about hard SFF actually, and I had never thought of it as like, no, I had never thought of it in like traditional like masculine versus traditional feminine sensibilities.
Yeah.
I just had never, that piece had never fallen in for me, but totally like grimdark, people go so wild for grimdark, and on the opposite side, like hope punk is beautiful.
Right.
Soft and lovely and joyous. I just want more of those stories. I do have a few. But yeah, I feel like I've been seeing more people ask for that though. I've been seeing a couple of people put out tweets like, I only read dark fantasy. Does anyone have like recommendations for happy fantasy?
Yes, we need it.
I mean, and I think there are some, well, and I think with sci-fi too, you get the hard, like super technical sci-fi, but when you say soft sci-fi, I immediately think of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet.
Yes, I think of that too, like a domestic sort of sci-fi.
Yeah, I love it.
I think of that as like the opposite side of the coin, as to bring back Yoonha Lee and Nine Fox Gambit. Like they have very similar sensibilities, except Yoonha Lee is like, no, but actually all this technical stuff is also happening.
Exactly. They're like best of both worlds.
Oh, I love it. Okay, I need to read Yoonha Lee. Like this, what I'm taking away from this.
Yeah. And I feel like that sort of boils down to like why I think those certain subgenres are sort of underrated, because I feel like SFF is such a male dominated sort of like masculine leaning genre. Even now, like there's still a precedent for like authors to have to use pen names like if they're not men, so that men will pick up their books. And it's like the major series that are like touchstones for SFF are all written by men. So it's like there's this idea of like what SFF is, or like what it should be, or like who it should appeal to. So like anything that doesn't fit in that sort of narrow lane just sort of gets left behind or not talked about as much.
And the weird impulse to make every woman who writes adult SFF a YA writer. Like, just say that this is YA, actually.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh,
That's
it
the
drives
whole
me
other thing.
crazy. Well,
Yeah.
and not even just SFF, but any genre fiction. Like, if there's ever a woman writing adult genre fiction, people are like, "Oh, it's this great YA book." I'm like, "It is not
It's really
YA. It's
not.
The person
not."
they're writing about is
Like,
30 years old.
yeah, like the character's 25. The character's like, it's not YA.
Yeah.
It's like, I promise you,
I
I
see.
promise you it's not.
Oh my gosh, I feel like every other week I'm seeing this on Twitter. I'm like, no.
No.
Well, like my favorite book I read last year, which is kind of like horror with a slight fantasy vibe, um, The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, which
Yeah.
is so good. It is not YA.
Nope.
It's not YA. And I have seen so many people call it YA, and like it's really not. It's really not. Just because the main character is like 19 is not YA.
Nope.
Yeah.
Ugh,
Ugh.
it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Like one of my pet peeves like on the bookternet.
Yeah.
Fantasy romance, I do agree, and I think there's some good stuff that like people maybe don't always realize is fantasy romance and that gets underhyped. Jocelyn, like a book you made me read that I love, and now I'm trying to push it on other people, is Empire of Sand by Tasha Sari.
Yes. Oh my God, it's on my TBR.
That was like the number one book I wrote down to talk about underrated SFF because it is.
God, how dare you not bring it up?
I know.
I was assuming it was going to come up at some point. Don't worry, I would not have gone the full time without talking about it.
Well, please pitch it.
Yeah, I'm like, the moment is now, man. Give it to us.
Empire of Sand is an adult fantasy with lots of romantic elements, and we are following a young woman named Meher. It is set in a Mughal-inspired era with lots of like dreamy magic. And Meher is a mixed race young woman who is growing up in her father's court. Basically, her mother were these sort of like nomadic indigenous people. And so her father doesn't consider her a bastard, and she does get quite a bit of privilege from that, but also many people around her look down on her. She sort of gets into trouble one day getting caught dancing, and then finds herself basically caught up in a marriage of like a forced sort of marriage just to save her family's life and to save her own life. And then from there we learn about this very creepy cult-like man who sort of rules this entire empire. Again, dreamy magic, and it's just absolutely beautiful. There's so much talk about consent, like the marriage between Meher and the moon is like the best thing I've ever read in my entire life.
Oh my gosh. It's like the most beautiful slow burn friends to lovers romance. It's so beautiful.
I'm trying. I'll get to it.
Do you need me to buy you a copy? I will buy you a copy.
I do not have a copy, but I will read it. I swear.
It is really very good. Okay, well, on that note, I think that is a good place to end this. And yeah, thank you guys. I think this has been a good conversation, and hopefully everybody got some awesome recommendations of books that you really should pick up, even if they're underhyped. Again, this has been Chapter 3 Podcast, and I'm your host, Bethany. You can follow us on Twitter at Chapter 3 Podcast, and you can also find me on YouTube at Beautifully Bookish Bethany talking about even more books. The next episode will be available in 2 weeks, and this episode's bonus content will be available to patrons in the next couple of days. Thanks for listening.